The brass compass on my desk caught the morning light at exactly 7:14 a.m., same as it had every trading day for the past 12 years. Dr. Sarah Chen gave it to me the day I joined Meridian Exchange, back when we still believed markets could be both fast and fair. The inscription on the back reads 40.7489 north, 74.0060 west. Those aren't just coordinates. They mark the exact location where the first algorithmic trade prioritized speed over equity back in 1987. Sarah called it Ground Zero for predatory trading. I'm Evelyn Rao, Chief Latency Engineer at Meridian, though that title would become meaningless in approximately 3 hours. My job, in simple terms, was to make sure our adaptive routing core processed 2.3 million orders per second through 47 execution venues, while maintaining microsecond-level fairness protocols. Think of it as air traffic control for money, except the planes never land and everyone's trying to cut in line. The ARC system was my baby, built from scratch over 8 years. Every line of code contained a piece of Sarah's philosophy that markets should serve all participants equally, not just the fastest sharks. The fairness protocols weren't just ethical window dressing, they were structural, load-bearing walls, preventing the entire system from collapsing into chaos. But try explaining that to Marcus Kellerman, our new CEO and self-appointed Chief Velocity Officer. Marcus arrived 6 months ago via private equity buyout, carrying his hedge fund mentality like a designer briefcase. His first all-hands meeting featured a 40-slide deck about, quote, velocity optimization, using the word synergy 17 times. I counted. He wore a $10,000 Breguet watch while explaining how we needed to trim the fat from our latency architecture. The irony of wearing a mechanical timepiece while obsessing over nanoseconds wasn't lost on me. That morning, February 15th, should have been a celebration. Sarah's final paper on temporal equality in market microstructure was being published posthumously in the Journal of Financial Markets. She died of cancer 18 months earlier, but her ideas lived on in every fairness protocol I'd coded. I'd worn my best suit. The charcoal Armani Sarah helped me pick for my first conference presentation, even brought Guatemalan coffee beans for the break room, Sarah's favourite. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the glass-walled conference room overlooking the Hudson. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his usual uniform of black turtleneck and designer jeans, making him look like a discount Steve Jobs. Behind him, a presentation titled Operation Raw Speed glowed on the screen. I sat 3 seats down, my brass compass in my jacket pocket. A comfort object, Sarah would have called it. Marcus began his presentation with typical bravado. Our latency metrics are stuck in what I call grandma mode, he announced, clicking to a slide showing our processing speeds. 2.6 microseconds average execution time. Do you know what Citadel X is running? 1.8. That 0.8 microsecond difference is costing us millions in institutional flow. He walked around the table as he spoke, a predator circling prey. The problem, he continued, is that we're carrying unnecessary weight. These so-called fairness protocols add complexity without value. Quote, stuffing detection, predatory flow analysis, temporal equality checks. He actually used air quotes. This isn't a charity, it's an exchange. Then he stopped behind my chair. Evelyn, here, our chief latency engineer, has been the architect of these, he paused, legacy protections. Her mentor, the late doctor. Chen had some interesting theories about market democracy, but theories don't pay for our new data center in New Jersey. He reached into my jacket pocket. I still don't know how he knew the compass was there. Maybe he'd seen me fidget with it during previous meetings. He held it up to the room like evidence in a trial. This little trinket, he said, turning it over in his manicured hands, perfectly represents our latency problem. old-fashioned, sentimental, and pointing toward outdated principles instead of profit. The room was silent. 23 pairs of eyes watched as Marcus walked back to the front, still holding my compass. "Sarah gave that to me," I said quietly. "Exactly my point," he replied. "We're not running a memorial service. We're running an exchange. Effective immediately, Evelyn, you're being reassigned to documentation review while we bring in Velocity Dynamics to optimize our architecture. They specialize in what they call naked speed infrastructure." He set the compass on the conference table with deliberate carelessness. The brass made a small clink against the glass. "As of Monday, all fairness protocols will be sunset. We're going to show the market what real speed looks like." I stood to retrieve the compass. My hand was halfway there when Marcus accidentally knocked it with his portfolio. The compass fell, hitting the marble floor with a crack that echoed through the room. The glass face spider webbed. The needle spun freely, no longer pointing anywhere. "Oops," Marcus said, not even looking down. Meeting adjourned. "Evelyn, HR will have your transition paperwork ready by noon." I knelt to pick up the broken compass. The inscription was still legible through the cracked case. 40.7489 north. Ground 0 for predatory trading. Sarah's warning, broken but not destroyed. My home office overlooked Riverside Park, 8 floors up in a pre-war building Sarah helped me find 10 years ago. The exposed brick wall held 3 monitors, each showing different aspects of the ARC system I'd soon lose access to. The broken compass sat on my desk, its cracked face reflecting the terminal's green glow. It was 11:43 p.m., February 15th. Sarah's paper had been published for exactly 13 hours and 43 minutes. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, pushing aside old conference badges and USB drives until I found it. A single manila folder marked TFCB regulatory filing, dated 3 years ago. Inside, 17 pages of dense regulatory documentation, establishing something called the Temporal Fairness Circuit Breaker. Sarah and I had filed it under an obscure provision of the 2010 Market Access Rule, specifically subsection 15B47. The beauty of regulatory compliance is that nobody actually reads the filings. They just check boxes and move on. The TFCB gave its registered operator, me, unilateral authority to halt trading, publish audit trails, and trigger SEC investigations when predatory patterns exceeded defined thresholds. Think of it as a dead man's switch for market manipulation, except I was very much alive and extremely motivated. I pulled up the ARC administrative console, entering my credentials one last time before Monday's lockout. The system recognized me immediately. "Welcome back, Chief Architect," it displayed, a title Marcus didn't even know existed in the code. My fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision. Command prompt, TFCB_ARM:COMPLIANCE_OVERRIDE_ENABLED. The screen flickered. A new interface appeared, one I'd coded in the 6 months after Sarah's diagnosis. Every predatory pattern she'd identified in 30 years of research was mapped here. Quote, stuffing thresholds, spoofing detection, momentum ignition triggers, but most importantly, audit trail preservation with automatic SEC notification. I set the thresholds carefully. Not so low they'd trigger immediately, that would be obvious, but low enough that Marcus's naked speed infrastructure would definitely cross them. Based on the Velocity Dynamics portfolio, I estimated it would take between 3 and 5 days. I gave it 4. At 11:47 p.m., I filed the compliance report with the SEC's automated system. Subject line, Temporal Fairness Circuit Breaker armed, Meridian exchange. The beauty of late-night filings is they get buried in the morning queue. Nobody would notice until it mattered. I poured myself 2 fingers of Lagavulin 16 year. Sarah's favourite scotch, and sat back to review my work. The system was armed. The thresholds were set. The audit trails would capture everything. All I had to do now was wait and watch Marcus build his own gallows out of pure speed. My phone buzzed, an automated message from HR confirming my reassignment to documentation review starting Monday. I raised my glass to the broken compass. "To true north, Sarah," I whispered. "Even if the needle's broken, I still know the way." Monday morning arrived with unseasonable rain. I reported to my new desk in the basement documentation centre, a windowless room that smelled like old toner and disappointment. They'd given me a 12-year-old Dell workstation and a login that only accessed archived compliance reports, but I didn't need system access. The TFCB was already running, silently monitoring every trade. Operation Raw Speed launched at market open with the fanfare of a Silicon Valley product release. Marcus sent an all-staff email at 9:28 a.m. with the subject line, "Welcome to the future." Quote, "Velocity had increased 340% overnight. Order throughput hit 4.1 million per second. The financial press ate it up. TechCrunch called it a paradigm shift in market microstructure. The Wall Street Journal ran a puff piece with Marcus's headshot above the fold. What they didn't report was what I could see on my phone, through a monitoring app I'd built years ago. Predatory behaviours were spiking exponentially. Quote, "Stuffing increased 1,200% in the first hour. Spoofing patterns emerged in 37 different symbols. The system wasn't just enabling bad behaviour, it was encouraging it. By Tuesday afternoon, the ARC had become a feedback loop of exploitation. The faster speeds allowed more sophisticated predatory strategies, which created more opportunities for manipulation, which incentivized even faster exploitation. The exchange had transformed into a high-frequency casino where the house always won and retail investors were the chips. I documented everything from my basement exile. Screenshots, timestamps, pattern analysis. The beautiful thing about Marcus's naked speed approach was that it left traces everywhere. No fairness protocols meant no filters on the audit logs. Every predatory trade was recorded in excruciating detail. Wednesday brought the first warning signs. Several large institutional clients complained about crossed markets, where the same security showed different prices on different venues simultaneously. The old fairness protocols would have prevented this, but Velocity Dynamics had stripped them out to save 18 nanoseconds. By Thursday morning, ghost liquidity had appeared. Phantom orders that disappeared microseconds before execution, baiting other algorithms into bad trades. The market makers started pulling back, reducing their quotes. Liquidity was evaporating, but the speed metrics looked fantastic. Marcus sent another all-staff email celebrating our record velocity achievements. The perfect storm hit Thursday at 2:47 p.m. Eastern. A large pension fund tried to execute a routine portfolio rebalancing, about $800 million in total volume. Under normal conditions, the ARC would have handled it smoothly, routing orders across venues to minimize market impact. But without fairness protocols, the system went into what I call predatory resonance. Every high-frequency trading firm saw the large order coming and tried to front-run it simultaneously. The feedback loops cascaded, quotes began oscillating wildly, the order book inverted with bids higher than asks. The system tried to self-correct, but without the structural stability of fairness protocols, it just made things worse. At 2:51 p.m., the entire system locked, not crashed, locked, like a seized engine that ran too hot without oil. $4.3 billion in trades were stuck in limbo, neither executed nor cancelled. The trading floor erupted in panic. Phones rang non-stop. Marcus's office door slammed shut. I sat in my basement office, watching the monitoring app display the beautiful chaos. Every threshold I'd set had been crossed. The TFCB had captured everything, line by line, trade by trade, with full attribution and timestamps. The SEC's automated systems had already received 17 separate violation notices. My phone rang. Marcus's assistant, voice shaking. "Mr. Kellerman needs you in the Emergency Operations Center immediately." I closed my laptop and picked up the broken compass from my desk. The needle still spun freely, but I knew exactly where I was heading. The Emergency Operations Center looked like mission control during Apollo 13. 20 monitors showed various shades of red. Engineers hunched over keyboards, muttering profanities. The head of trading stood in the corner, his phone pressed to each ear simultaneously. And in the center, Marcus paced like a caged predator, his black turtleneck soaked with stress sweat. "Fix it," he barked at no one in particular. Then he saw me. "Evelyn, finally. Your ancient system locked up. We need you to unlock it." I set my broken compass on the conference table, deliberately loud. "It's not locked, Marcus. It's in regulatory halt." The room went silent. Marcus's face cycled through confusion, anger, and something approaching fear. "What regulatory halt?" "We removed all those protocols." "You removed the fairness protocols," I said calmly. "But the Temporal Fairness Circuit Breaker is registered with the SEC under Market Access Rule 15, B47. It's been monitoring every trade since Monday." I pulled up the main display and logged in with my chief architect credentials. The TFCB interface appeared, showing a cascade of violations in real time. Let me walk you through what happened, line by line. I clicked the first violation. Quote stuffing in symbol, AAPL 200,000 false orders in 8 milliseconds. Here's the interesting part. Trace ID leads back to Citadel's colocation server, but they were responding to a spoofed order from our own smart order router. Marcus stepped closer. "That's impossible." Line 8400, momentum ignition in SPY, triggered by our system removing all mid-quote protections. Estimated retail investor losses, $47 million in 6 minutes. His Breguet watch caught the light as his hand trembled. "You're making this up." Line 12,091, crossed market arbitrage enabled by removing timestamp synchronization. The same share of Microsoft sold for 2 different prices simultaneously on our exchange. That's securities fraud. The head of trading's phones both rang simultaneously. He looked at the caller ID and went pale. "It's the SEC, he whispered. "Of course it is," I said. "They've been listening to this entire conversation. The TFCB includes real-time compliance monitoring. It's been streaming since I walked in." Marcus lunged for the console, but I'd already pulled up the critical file. Line 3991, I continued. "Authorization to remove all protective protocols and implement naked speed infrastructure. Time-stamped Monday, 9:07 a.m. And here's the beautiful part, Marcus. Your personal authorization signature." The room was so quiet, I could hear the fluorescent lights humming. Marcus's face had gone from red to white to a shade of grey I'd never seen on human skin. I turned to address the room, knowing the SEC was recording every word. The fairness protocols weren't overhead, they were load-bearing. They prevented predatory resonance cascades. When you removed them, you didn't make the system faster. You made it unstable. Every physics undergraduate knows that removing dampeners from an oscillating system leads to catastrophic resonance. But apparently, nobody at Velocity Dynamics took undergraduate physics. Marcus found his voice, though it cracked. "You did this. You sabotaged the system." I picked up the broken compass, running my finger along the cracked glass. "I didn't do anything except document your decisions. Every trade, every violation, every authorization. You built this catastrophe yourself. I just made sure there would be evidence." The head of trading held up his phone. "The SEC wants to speak with Mr. Kellerman immediately." Marcus looked around the room like a drowning man searching for a life preserver. "Fix this," he said to me. "You're the chief latency engineer." I smiled for the first time in 5 days. "Actually, according to your own paperwork, I'm in documentation review, and I've documented everything." The emergency board meeting convened at 7 p.m. in the same glass-walled conference room where Marcus had broken my compass. Only this time, he sat at the side of the table while board chair Elizabeth Conway commanded the head position. The SEC had given the board 48 hours to present a remediation plan or face immediate suspension of our exchange license. I sat across from Marcus, the broken compass placed deliberately between us. General counsel, head of compliance, and 3 independent board members filled the remaining seats. The wall-mounted display showed the TFCB interface, still recording. "Miss Rao," Elizabeth began, "the board has reviewed your documentation. Can you restore market operations?" "Yes," I replied. "The system can be restored in approximately 6 hours. But first, we need to discuss terms." Marcus started to speak, but Elizabeth silenced him with a look. "The board is listening," she said. I opened my laptop and pulled up a prepared document. First, immediate implementation of the Sarah Chen Memorial Fairness Protocol suite. Every protection Marcus removed, plus 17 improvements I've developed. Second, full restitution to all retail investors affected by this week's predatory trading, estimated at $312 million. Third, my appointment as Chief Market Integrity Officer, a new C-level position reporting directly to the board. Marcus's hands clenched. "This is extortion." "No," I said calmly. "Extortion would be if I leaked the recording of you calling fairness protocols grandma mode on the day Dr. Chen's paper was published. This is consequence management." Elizabeth looked at the other board members. They nodded almost imperceptibly. "And Mr. Kellerman's position?" she asked. I smiled. "Marcus loves velocity metrics. I think his termination notice should include one. Time from CEO to federal defendant. Approximately 4 days. That's got to be some kind of record." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You planned this, from the moment I touched that compass." I stood too, picking up the broken compass. "No, Marcus, I planned this from the moment you confused speed with value. You thought latency was just about being fast, but latency is the time between action and consequence, and your consequences just arrived." He stormed out, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Elizabeth extended her hand. "The board accepts your terms, Ms. Rao. When can you start the restoration?" I shook her hand. "Already started. The system will be operational by market open, with all protections in place." 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room, now my office, presenting quarterly metrics to institutional clients. The Sarah Chen Memorial Fairness Protocols had reduced predatory trading by 94%, while actually improving legitimate execution speeds. Turns out, when you remove the parasites, the host gets healthier. The brass compass sat on my desk, repaired with gold kintsugi, the Japanese art of fixing broken things with precious metal. The cracks were still visible, but now they were beautiful, part of its story. It pointed true north again. Marcus's LinkedIn profile listed him as a strategic advisor to various startups, though the financial press had other terms for his new role. The Southern District of New York had filed 37 counts of market manipulation based on the TFCB evidence. His Breguet watch had been sold to pay legal fees. The irony of time finally catching up with him wasn't lost on anyone. Bloomberg published a feature about the Meridian incident, calling it the most comprehensive example of regulatory capture and reversal in exchange history. They interviewed Marcus's replacement at Velocity Dynamics, who admitted they'd never actually understood how our fairness protocols worked. They just assumed they were unnecessary because they made things slower. But my favourite outcome came in a handwritten letter from Dr. Chen's daughter, thanking me for protecting her mother's legacy. She'd framed a quote from Sarah's published paper. "True north in finance isn't profit, it's fairness. And fairness isn't measured in microseconds, but in generations." I looked out at the Hudson, the afternoon light catching the gold veins in my repaired compass. Marcus had been right about one thing. Latency was our problem, but not in the way he thought. The real latency was the time between building something meaningful and watching someone try to destroy it for speed. Now that latency was zero. The system protected itself. Sarah's work lived on in every trade, and somewhere in federal court, Marcus was learning that the fastest route isn't always the right one. I picked up the compass, feeling the rough gold lines under my fingers. The inscription still read 40.7489 north, 74.0060 west, ground zero for predatory trading. But now it also marked something else. The coordinates where speed finally lost to substance. The market closed at 4 p.m. 2.3 million trades processed, 0 predatory violations detected, perfect fairness scores across all venues. Latency is a lie, Marcus had said in one of his presentations. He was right, but not in the way he intended. Real latency isn't about speed. It's about the time between doing what's easy and doing what's right. And sometimes, if you're patient enough and prepared enough, there's no latency at all between justice and its arrival. The compass pointed north. True north. Sarah's north. And for the first time in 6 months, that felt like exactly the right speed.